So let's start with our topic for today, which is the earthquake and following tsunami in Japan. Let's just go back to where we all were when we found out about it. What were your first thoughts? Gil?
I was actually working on my laptop in bed, which is a pretty common pose for me, and I received one of those breaking news email alerts about a earthquake and tsunami in Japan, and sounded pretty serious. So I turned on the TV, watched CNN, MSNBC, Fox, just flip back and forth. And I was amazed. I was born in Japan, and I know how common earthquakes are in Japan, but I also know how devastating they can be too. So when I turned on the TV, I was just dumbstruck at the sight of the tsunami just rolling over rice fields and overtaking cars that were trying to get away, and picking up houses and boats. And it really was a horrible sight, but it was one of those things where I was transfixed by the image and was truly awestruck, because it was awesome, full of awe at the power, horrible, terrible power of nature.
Seeing something like this happen in Japan really, calls into question for me a couple different things in terms of what is the capacity of our different governments across the world in terms of emergency natural disaster response. Some of the other things that I think about are, I really have no expertise in this area whatsoever, but just really thinking about is the Earth in a state where it's going to become increasingly less stable in terms of earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and how much human impact is involved in that in terms of the environmental damage that we're seeing in different places. So those are some of the first things that came to mind as I just started, reading and keeping on top of what was happening in Japan.
Do you think the calm response by the Japanese government has been successful? What do you all think about that? What does it mean to have a calm response, and is that going well?
It's right. It's a cultural value to be calm and to stay cool and not bring undue attention. I think a lot of cultural values are coming into play, both in the way the government in Japan is reacting, and of course there's a lot of, I think, reason for mistrust. I think TEPCO probably is responsible for a lot of bad things, that especially in regards to the nuclear stuff, and I think the Japanese government has put up a lot of bureaucratic roadblocks to getting aid. You keep reading the stories about aid workers can't use the highway because it's only for emergency vehicles, but there are no emergency vehicles on the highway right now, a month after the earthquake, and yet aid workers can't use the highway yet because of bureaucracy. Food and money and fuel isn't getting to affected areas. So I think there's a lot of problems. But the way that the Japanese people act, both at the government level and at the level of the people themselves, I think is very much a cultural response. There's no looting. Oh, people are waiting patiently in line.
Right.
They're such a wonderful people. Unfortunately, that it bugs me a little bit, because to me, that's what the media are focusing on are stereotypes that are going to just be reinforced. But a lot of that is just the cultural values that they have.
Yeah, it's so hard to know what's really happening on the ground, right? We're in Denver, we're in LA, we're in New York, and for me to say that I have any sense of what it actually means to have lost my home, to have lost friends and family, to have lost neighbors, right now, would be a gross misestimation. And I think very similarly in the case in Katrina, for people to be able to accurately represent what was happening is incredibly difficult when we're in these times of chaos and emergency.
So that kind of brings up the next question, which is, if this had happened in the United States, heaven forbid, and here I am, in the most likely place it's going to happen in Los Angeles. How would this be different?
If it happens in LA, if it happens in LA, it would be very similar to if the tsunami and earthquake happened in Tokyo. And luckily it didn't, right? I mean, Tokyo was affected, but the damage was in a relatively rural part of northern Japan. So if it happened in, northern California, it wouldn't have the same effect as if it happened in LA. And if it happens in LA, I think all bets are off. It'll be an insane level of disaster. It'll be a media circus and feeding frenzy. It'll be a horrible tragedy. I mean, that's the other thing. We need to always remember that I can get cynical and look at just the government piece or look at just the media piece. And it's sometimes easy to forget, like Kelly pointed out, the individual human tragedy.
I mean, something that I find very interesting in terms of, the global response to what's happening in Japan right now is when we're looking at philanthropy and individual giving, because I've read that the individual giving rates for what's happened in Japan are fairly similar to what happened with the tsunami in 2005, but that's far outpaced by the giving that was by the philanthropy that was raised for Haiti, and then the most being to the survivors of Hurricane Katrina, which brings up a lot of questions for me, and I wonder why that is. Because when we're talking about poverty and we're talking about suffering, when we're talking about emergency crisis response, it seems as though this is huge conjecture on my part, but it seems like some of the giving for Katrina from the international community was kind of like it's almost like a political bargaining chip that people were using to try to be like, see, United States, we can, help you, and we're going to, do this for you, and to kind of throw in the United States face the kind of incredible, racism and inequities that are here.
I think in the wake of this disaster that there's a little bit more awareness and a connection to their roots. And when I've talked to Japanese Americans more recently, they've all been, my relatives are from Hiroshima, so they were fine, or my relatives are from here or there. And so they are more aware now. And I think that's a good thing.